start out with thanking all of you who have donated to this monastery, to this teacher, to this teaching, to this community. So thanking you for that, and also asking for more help as we go along. If you can, please continue to help us. So clarification, not elaboration. So just when you're asked a question, or when you're asking a question, it's the clarification that's important, not making things more and more elaborate. Sometimes people, when they ask questions, they tend to, instead of just having a straight question, have lots of elaborations. And when, in other situations, when we're asked to a question, we can tend to elaborate on it rather than fundamentally clarify it. This is a talk topic as suggested by Sokuzan. So if I can't go much further with it, I might have to ask him to talk about it. It's a good point that we could consider when we're responding or interacting with anyone, is to try to clarify what it is that we're working with, what it is that we're asking about, rather than elaborating, stretching it out, elaborating on it. That's all I would say. No, you can't shut me up that easy. Sometimes I say when someone goes from the question, goes into the basic question is there in what they're asking about, but they tend to go off into an elaboration on it rather than a clarification. Sometimes I'll say, what is it you want to know? Because what is it you want to know kind of brings it right down to what is it? Rather than the question starts to cloud up or cloud over what it is you're actually asking about, which can jump into the elaboration rather than what is it you want to know. So I probably should just elaborate on that a little bit. Go ahead.
Is there a basic distinction then between those two concepts, those two terms?
So the clarification would be taking what it is you've asked, possibly, or discussing, and try to speak about that in such a way that clarifies it, makes it possibly even more than likely even simplifies it. And the elaboration is more of jumping from what that is and starting to write a short story about it, an essay on it, or some kind of elaboration that some people have more of a tendency to do that than others. It varies. And so keep it simple, keep it very simple and direct.
Sometimes, particularly in book studies, we might give you some what we might call background information. Mm-hmm. Would that be a clarification in an attempt to clarify?
It could be. It could go either direction. Either it could come out as an elaboration or a clarification. There's quite a difference.
Mm-hmm. So is an elaboration more of a defensive stand?
It is reinforcing that aspect of the consciousness commonly known as ego. So we might not be consciously showing off. We might not be consciously covering something up, but that could be happening. We could be actually covering up what we're very sincere about wanting to know, but we're not clear about that. So therefore we tend to elaborate on it. So it's like, this happens to some people who sometimes people say, well, I had a question for you, but I already know what you're going to say, so I'm not going to ask you. A little, wouldn't you say it's a little bit disrespectful? Possibly. Or maybe not. Maybe it's just true. I know what you're going to say, so I'm going to ask you. You.
Shadow bowing.
Thanks for helping me with this, because I didn't know where I was going to go without elaborating. Go ahead.
It seems like my presumption coming into this practice is that clarification is more description and more specific, tight concepts around what I'm trying to point to. How does that not clarify?
Give me an example. Should be able to do that. As intelligent and brilliant as you are. Give me some simple example. Come on.
So like if I said something like, do you see that building over there? And you could ask, could you clarify which one? I might say, well, it's that 1920s such and such type of house, and then go and list all the characteristics about it. I'm wondering, I guess, is that clarifying?
I don't know. Could be.
Sokuzan, do we have to have a sense of a misunderstanding or where the other person, like how the other person may be approaching something, or in order to clarify? How can we know what needs to be clarified, I guess?
Boy, we're going to ask Chazon here. You want to respond to that, Chazon?
I'm going, no.
Okay. Well, that
But
was.
I did want to ask,
Go ahead.
when I initially brought that up to you, some of the context was when we ask questions, the example I would give is like if somebody would ask, well, when does consciousness first enter the body? And it's like this elaboration of creating some system to understand instead of what is consciousness, or trying to understand the fundamental thing that's being presented to us. So what my question is, how can we look at the way in which we ask questions of the teacher to help us clarify the misunderstanding instead of asking questions that create a more and more elaborate ideology of what this is? Bowing.
Okay. Y'all get that? Bjorn, go ahead.
Being bowing, is an elaboration a distraction from the truth?
It can be, oh, yes, it can be elaboration, it can be some kind of production that masquerades as a question, but is actually more of an elaboration to get someone to engage in a conversation around something, have a discussion about it. Nothing wrong with the discussions. Nothing wrong with elaborations if there can be, we need to be more elaborate about particular things. So that may apply in questions about the Dharma, and it may not. More.
Being bowing, where can we look for clarification within ourselves? Can we do that, bowing?
It seems to me that the more we practice sitting meditation, shikantaza, the more we get clarity about the confusion we're dealing with. So clarity doesn't actually apply, but clarity about confusion does come up. Sometimes that's very painful as we begin to look at the confusion, especially if we begin to see somewhat embarrassingly how we're actually creating a lot of that. We're actually participating in it. We're actually cranking it up because ego wants to have a position, and it doesn't often care what that position is as long as it's something, and it can be even incorrect or a misunderstanding that one clings to or fixates on.
She is on bowing.
Yes, sir.
Is there a fundamental situation we should endeavor to return to when we're investigating what this is, bowing?
I'm biased in this area. I feel that you should ask what you want to know. What you want to know, that is, what do you want to know about? And it can be, it can be something very direct. Is there a difference in what arises in consciousness, of its passion, aggression, ignorance? How does that show up? That could be a fairly direct question about what you would want to know, that a teaching person could respond to, possibly. I think keeping it very simple is important and direct.
Is there a way to tell if our questions are kind of building the story or building up the ego versus getting to a fundamental truth, bowing?
I think it would be difficult to know for sure. Sometimes. I think it's variable. It's important to be as direct as possible with what it is you want to know. And so if there's an elaboration around that, as you're kind of going on and setting a big preamble with the idea that, well, I'm going to need to let the teacher know where this is all coming from, that may or may not be necessary. Sometimes that preamble is just, the teacher probably already knows about that. And so you could just ask directly what it is you want to know, instead of building up a introduction to the whole thing. Sure.
Sure, why does that direct question, at least for me, it seems more disappointing to just ask what I want to know and give you the preamble.
It seems more disappointing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the downside of it, from the point of view of your asking, it's disappointing. Could you say something about why that is, or what that's about?
That's what the question's coming out of. It seems like I get some kind of nourishment from the preamble, and I'm wondering what that is.
Yeah, Alshan's agreeing with you, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. You agreeing?
Yeah, I'm identifying with what he's saying. Yeah.
Are you? Anybody else identifying with that stupid statement that you made? No, it's not stupid. But it's it's telling that that you want something else about that situation. You want something more than just a response. The teaching person, if you make that a direct question about this, then this teacher, or he, she, they, that teacher is going to be able to respond to you directly, because it's a question, but they can respond to it. And sometimes as you know, in the Zen tradition, sometimes the mando, or whatever fancy name you want to give it, between the teacher and the student sometimes can be very koan-like. That doesn't mean that the teacher is being evasive. It means that you've asked a very, very direct question, and then the teacher can come back with something that gives you the whole thing, the quality of the question, the quality of a call and response. It can be a very direct response that also, from the point of view of solving it for you, it puts you into that situation even deeper, and allows you to begin to see it and understand it for yourself. Are you following me a little bit? Is anybody following me? No? No? All right. How about you? More questions? Go ahead. Make it a very direct question. Can't do that.
Shadow bowing.
Is this like an upside down gut show?
Yeah, I took it back.
Oh, you took it, took it back. Did you get that?
I was looking.
You weren't looking? You don't have an audience that you thought you had. Go ahead.
Shadow bowing. So is the response from a teacher more about putting us into the not knowing than answering the question?
Sure. Yes. The motivation of the teacher is to help you see your true nature, to come right and see the nature of the complete illusion of duality, of this as opposed to that, or this in front of that, because the illusion is intense, an intense feeling of everyone else is over there and I'm over here, except the difference is the teacher is seeing that is an illusion that is unreal. And also, we're not all one either. That would be another illusion. There's no oneness. There's no separation. It transcends those polarities of being all one or all separate. More?
Shadow bowing. Does the preamble in our question keep up some armor?
Every time you ask a question, the teacher, this teacher, probably any true teacher would see the nature of your confusion and would be able to help you insofar as you're able to receive it, but they can't lay something on you necessarily, or may or may not, but probably will not lay something on you as a response that it's just going to make things worse or make it more confusing for you. Sure.
What does clarification look like in the mind stream?
I just about have to come up with an example, but it would just be if there's something about the question that the teacher is not clear of what you're asking, then they might say, could you say more? Or the ways that I often say this, can you paraphrase? So if you just asked about a particular dynamic in consciousness or in your life, or working with negativity, or working with the four karmas, or any, pacifying, enriching, magnetizing, and destroying, those show up quite a bit differently depending on the situation. You can't come up with a protocol or a standard that say, well, if they do this, then you do this. It won't work. So if you were asking about that, then the clarification might have to do with a particular situation. You might be asking, just to generalize, the difference between enriching and magnetizing. Those are two of the four karmas. And so if you should, in this given situation, is it magnetizing someone in order to relate with them directly? You might have to magnetize them into your, out of their mind stream into your own dynamic more, so you can actually communicate with them. It maybe fundamentally help them. Enriching may be joining in with their negativity. So magnetizing, you're pulling them this way. Enriching, you're joining in. So if you come up with a situation and you say, should I be enriching or magnetizing, or what should I be doing then in this given situation? And then if you were to explain, well, this person is doing this, or they're causing this kind of distress in the situation we're both working in our workplace. And I could just elaborate, which is the very topic here, clarification. So I'm endeavoring to clarify. And what I'm saying is you might come back and explain a little bit more about the dynamic that you're relating to with that person. So then the teacher could say, that would be more about you joining that person in that, enriching. You would go in and fluff up what they're already dealing with so that you are participating in their confusion rather than you're magnetizing them out of the confusion into your apparent clarity. Are you following me? Yeah, so that it would be that kind of situation. So what I just did was clarify. It may seem kind of elaborate to some extent, but quite often endeavoring to clarify something can seem like elaboration. So my elaboration was a cover-up for how much I don't know. Did it work? It worked. Go ahead.
Choosing mine. I'm thinking even just elaborating on what's arising in my mind stream, seeing the way that thoughts add on to whatever's showing up, and I'm wondering what clarification would be in that context, clarification of what's arising.
Okay, I'm going to do something with you here that I just mentioned. Paraphrase what you just said. Don't use the same words, say it a different way. If you understand what you just said, you'll be able to paraphrase it.
Choosing mind. What is the process of clarifying the mind?
Clarifying your communication to someone. I thought that's what we were discussing, the interaction between two people. Go ahead.
Choosing mind. And I was taking it into just what was showing up
Okay.
inside the mind stream rather than communication.
Okay, then what do you want to know?
Choosing mind. I think I might be looking for what proof of what clarification would look like.
Well, I thought the example I just gave was getting a little close to it. Anybody want to agree with me? Taking those two things and trying to clarify which one would be the most workable in a given situation, depending on what the situation was you were dealing with. Sometimes you want to magnetize someone away from some situation that is difficult or dangerous or confusing for that person or for you or for everyone. And another time you want to, because it's not showing up that way, you might have to enrich. Another one, you might have to destroy it. The first one, of course, being pacifying. So clarifying would be what the whole dynamic is between two people or a conversation or a situation that's arising. No more? Is that confusing? Okay, I'm gonna have to talk to your boss. Go ahead.
So bowing, are we elaborating to ourselves on the cushion? Bowing.
Facing the wall, we might do a lot of that, chattering to ourselves and talking to ourselves. This arises, and we have a comment, and then something else, then we spread that out or push it back or move it forward, turn it over, look at it, investigate, see if it supports us, see if it's against us. Lots of different directions show up there. More?
Sure, bowing. Is clarification watching the elaboration?
Could be, yes. Just to observe anything, observe the elaboration, and then you may go in the direction of concluding something. If it just happens spontaneously, then just watch the conclusion. When I say don't conclude, I know you can't accomplish that. I can't. Most people can't. But if you say don't conclude, then you actually start to become more aware of the spontaneous, like a knee-jerk reaction, just, of this happens, then you do this. This happens, to you. The thought process goes this way or this way, trying to establish some kind of a dynamic where the actual illusion of a separate self is protected. That's quite often that's what's happening in consciousness. We're trying to not see that there is no one here, because the path leading up to that can be scary, confusing, frightening, but the actual realization of it isn't anything at all, because there isn't anyone left to have a reaction, because you've seen there isn't anyone. So the consciousness is no longer reacting to, I can't go there, or staying over here, I'm not going to engage in that, I'm not gonna, and quite often that is manipulated by fear of being a fool, fear of making a fool of ourselves. Sometimes it's fear of actually out and out hurting somebody, because we know that our emotions are volatile, and we might need to have an intense reaction over something that's really not that much. More.
Shadow bowing. Is Sangha a place to allow those volatile emotions to show up?
Well, they're probably going to show up somewhere. Depends on who you are and where you are, and it's just so variable. So I wouldn't say, yes, this is a place you should explode and blow up and point the finger. But if it happens in this kind of an environment, you're going to get a lot more understanding and more basic sanity about the nature of confusion, about the nature of passion, aggression, ignorance, hope, and fear in a Sangha situation. It's still going to be difficult. People aren't here because they're already enlightened or sane, particularly. I should say, haven't realized their enlightenment, because everyone is already enlightened. Not something to believe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good area for questions if you have them. Go ahead. Those are good.
Sokuzan bowing, if we're having difficulty show up, should we remove ourselves from practice, knowing that it may be difficult for others to see suffering?
A lot of variability in there in that situation. I would say basically no. Don't do anything unless you have to. So stay. The best place for you to work on any of this, and I'm pretty biased when it comes to this, is sit down, hold still, face the wall, and watch what happens in the mind structure that is continually trying to provide some kind of artificial security for who you think you are. Some kind of anything. And also, it can be positive, take up on a positive kind of situation. It can also take on something very negative.
Sokuzan bowing, for instance, if I were to start crying on the cushion, is it ego or pride that wants to remove myself?
Sure. If you're in this practice, if you're in the Zendo and you begin to cry, you shouldn't leave. But if you're having a coughing fit, you might want to leave. But if you're just crying, then you might want to stay here. Do it that way. That also tells other people that they can cry in here too. So it's very important. I can start crying at any moment. I never know when that's going to happen. And I'm not interested in protecting you from your opinions about me. Have all the opinions you want. You may have enough opinions, cause you to leave this place, get out of here, get out of my sight. Because if you're in front of me, I'm going after you in one way or another. It might be soft as a kitten, and it might be sharp fangs. Why? I want you to wake up. I want you to see what this is before the end of your life, this particular lifetime. If you're interested, I'm all about helping you without interfering with the karma that you need to see. And that's not something I'm figuring out. It's obvious to me, not because I'm such a smart person. Might be the opposite. I'm kind of a simple, ordinary factory worker.
Hands-on bowing.
Go ahead, Kenzan.
I'm wondering about working with elaborations that may have taken place decades ago that are no longer conceptual, but are more manifesting as symptoms or feelings. Any particular way to work with those?
So, yeah, well, you heard my standard response to almost all of that is just receive it. And if you need to do something with it, you won't be able to help it. But do this or do that or do this or do that. So insofar as you can, whatever shows up in the mind stream, just receive it. It's this kind of a mudra. Here it comes, and you're going to receive that. Here's some more coming from over here. You're going to receive that. You don't do anything with it. You don't wad it up and stick it under your armpit. You just receive it. And if you just receive it, it won't do much. As Changu Rinpoche once said, if you do nothing to thoughts, they will do nothing to you. So all you're doing is thoughts show up, you just receive the thought. That's the only way that I know of that you're going to see the fundamental nature of what this is, which is non-dual. It's not only not two, not this and this. It's worse than that. There is no otherness anywhere. So you can't do any math with it. You can do math with relative truth, of course. The very structure of relative truth is numbers and counting the 10,000 things. So whatever shows up, even if it started 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, it's just the landslide of otherness, the landslide of causes and conditions, the Peloponnesian War, the war between the states, the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean conflict, they called it. So that changed the name a little bit so it isn't quite a war. Well, it was a war. People died. But it's just those things are coming from causes and conditions that are can't even find the source of that because it's so complicated.
As I'm buying,
Yes.
are conditions in the mind that maybe like described as psychological knots or neuroses or something, is working those out part of the awakening process, if I could put it that way, bowing?
So thank you for the questions. Very good question. I'm going to be very direct about that. You watch, you observe. When I say observe, I'm talking about awareness, which you'll hear me say it over and over again. You don't have to fix a damn thing. That's a extremely seductive thing. And it's all over the internet. It's all over books and magazines. And here's the way to do it. Here's how you do it. I'm telling you very directly, you don't need anything but your own consciousness. And you don't even need the Buddha's Dharma. But it would be difficult to do this if you didn't have some kind of a teaching that is saying, look at it. That's what this is. I haven't done anything. Of course, I've read hundreds of books, maybe thousands of books. But what I am endeavoring to tell you about is you can see this, but you won't see it unless you settle down and prioritize just the seeing, just the smelling, tasting, touching, just the thoughts, not what the thoughts are about. Doesn't matter. You can be having sexual fantasies. Doesn't matter. It's receive it. Don't fight with anything. Don't agree with anything. Don't disagree with anything. Just if it comes to the doorway, you don't even have to invite it in. Just don't stand in its way. It has its own traction. It has its own karma, its own causes and conditions that look so separate, like something else is pushing it. That's part of the illusion, that you think that this causes that. And it does to some extent. If you want to settle for that simple explanation, go ahead. But if you do that, you're going to go into some other way of working with the mind. And which I've said many times. Some people, that's all they can do is work with some kind of therapy, some kind of or some other digression away from the difficulty, which might be a sport or might be something to do besides just sit and worry about themselves or be anxious. There's just so many things showing up. But if you want to see what it is fundamentally, you need to look at it. It's awareness, not fixing, solving. That's challenging, but you can do that. As I said just recently, it's like you're going along, and the only way you realize that you're no longer operating in relative give and take, push and pull, up and down, back and forth, success and failure, life and death, is you're walking through the snow and you look down and there's no footprints. You've not left any trace of anything. So, and if you really see what that is, you realize you've always been awake. The past and the future are gone. They're relatively, just like this coffee cup is here, and I have a relative mouth with a relative desire for coffee. Luckily, I have some coffee. Zen masters in ancient times always used having tea as a way of teaching. Have some tea. Pointing the direct nature of the mind, but with such simple situation like that. Is there some kind of hidden message? No, it's completely obvious. There's only this. There's only this cup of tea.
Kabali, is there an elaboration that is just a cup of tea?
No, the tea is an elaboration, but you see what it is. You see that it's an elaboration.
Is there a way to not know the elaboration?
Yeah, you're doing it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have asked the question.
What's the not knowing of the knowing?
Same thing. The same thing. There isn't anything else.
Sort of knowing what's creating the footprints when it looks like we are leaving footprints, knowing.
Just the thinking about it, judging and evaluating, elaborating, plop, 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 plop. Lots of footprints must mean something's really valid. Lots of tracks, lots of elaborations. Any questions on Zoom?
Chun-Chu, you talked about sitting meditation as a way of clarifying the mind. That seems a way of receiving, clarifying through receiving.
Yes.
Is there a way in communication with another person to clarify that's not just producing?
Yes, listen to everyone. Listen to them until they say, well, aren't you going to say something? People, if you just receive, eventually people get nervous around you. You're doing way too much listening, that's what they should be doing. But they see you're doing the listening, so that gives them an opportunity to blame you for stuff. One of the ways is, well, I'm here spilling my guts and everything, and you're just all silent and you're just all enlightened. Hasn't anybody ever talked to you that way? Kind of accuse you of being kind of quiet because you're being better than they are somehow, more reserved, kind of be sarcastic with you on it. You ever had that happen? Talk more. I'm not done with Junju here. Go ahead, Junju.
What should I do in that situation?
Just listen. Listen, you can actively listen more if you're in a situation where you're being challenged or something, and say, well, say more. I follow what you're saying there a little bit, but can you say more about that? Can you say a little bit more? What you're doing is you're engaging them in what they're saying. You're drawing them out a little bit, but not too much.
How does listening clarify?
Because if you continue to listen and receive and receive and receive whatever's showing up without adding, subtracting, or dividing, then you eventually will see your true nature. It might take a long time. And it seems to be necessary to train yourself by practicing, listening to your own mind, listening to your own mind stream come and go. Nothing to fix, nothing to correct. It's just thoughts coming and going. Steep, angular thoughts, soft, curvy thoughts. Thoughts, thinking. Just observe, just receive. the world is being extremely generous with all of us. All we have to do is receive this world. We don't have to produce much at all. If you're really receiving, then with your particular karmic dynamic, whatever that may be, you might find yourself to be very productive in some area you hadn't even thought of before. Could be even writing poetry, or it could be gardening. It could be just going to work at the library. I mean, it could be something very ordinary that just is spontaneously showing up for you. Very simple.
Bowing. When we're communicating with someone else, is it possible to not produce enough? Bowing.
Well, they might accuse you of that. Is that what you're saying?
That, or can it be where we're not meeting the situation where it's at?
Perhaps. Again, situational. Very difficult to give some kind of a, well, do it this way, do it that way. You could use something like the four karmas. But sometimes that doesn't work so well. Pacifying, enriching, magnetizing, destroying.
Bowing. When is less not better?
Well, somebody's drowning, 50 feet away from you, and you know how to swim. Might want to do more. It's situational, but the idea there is we need to. If you practiced a lot, you'll have more clarity around how much you're interfering with someone based on you wanting to look good or be good or live up to some situation that you've set up for yourself. When that situation, if you looked at it very clearly, it might be good to allow that person to experience what looks like they're headed for. You don't have to save anybody, rescue anybody. It's not that kind of saving all beings. It isn't getting in the way of their karma necessarily, pulling them out of the drink or becoming a person who's a savior. More?
Not yet. Thank you.
Yes.
Sandra Vine. Just to clarify if I'm getting the right message, is it that it's not necessarily good or bad to clarify or elaborate, but more important to understand which thing it is that we're doing and why we're doing it? Like if we're acting, we're attempting to appear that we're trying to clarify when what we're really doing is elaborating to please our own ego or to...
You said quite a bit right there. If that's your question, I would say yes. It's about seeing your intention, seeing what you're up to. And you probably won't be able to see what you're up to unless, as far as I understand, unless you're doing a lot of sitting meditation. And even that is not going to save you. It actually has to be done on the spot in the intention to be genuine, be sincere. Difficult to do, especially if you're being haunted by all kinds of feelings that you're not sure what they're about and where they're coming from and who's causing them. So very important to just receive whatever shows up as much as possible. More?
If you'd like to elaborate, I'd like to listen.
That's not funny. I could elaborate, I suppose. That's all I'm doing, I guess, is elaborating.
Turtle bowing. Looking at the image of someone drowning, I think you said it's not like the kind of saving we're doing isn't pulling someone out of the drink. But if someone's drowning and they see the robe, they see a monk here and they think that means I'm a lifeguard, do I respond out of the help that they think that this is?
Stop it. That's an elaboration. I mean, you're actually getting caught up in your own mind stream as if there's something you need to know about that will help you when that situation comes up, so you'll have an idea of what to do. So you're actually looking for a standard. You see that? You don't need a standard. Although you could say, well, this is a Buddhist monastery and we have standards here. We do, we have forms, but you're not, no one is it's not being enforced to the point of you have to do this. If you're not feeling well, maybe you can't make it here. But if you can, you should be here. Otherwise, why live in a monastery? Live down the street at that other place. Right.
Divine. Can we know when clarification's needed? When we're communicating with somebody?
Somewhat, but you can't really demand clarification from somebody who's confused, who is roiling around. You can't demand that they clarify. You might ask for it, but if it doesn't show up as clarifying, it shows up as more confusion, more elaboration, more validation, justification for the confusion that you're seeing in them or you're seeing in yourself, then just less is better. Don't do anything with it. You have to actually allow it to wind down. Just like when Kenzan was asking earlier about having, I think he used the idea of knots and stuff like that in the mind stream. That actually needs to be seen, but not meddled with. We don't really undo or fix anything. That might work in other disciplines or in other ways, but it has a relative validity and maybe should be used. But in this, on the path of a spiritual path of awakening, the spiritual path of awareness about this, where the thinking process is there and is used for sure, but it's secondary to what is showing up in your open hands in this particular mudra. Receive this. More.
It seems obvious that there's that the situation's being misunderstood. Do we need to be invited to clarify?
Let me back up a little bit and say, what's the first part of your question?
There's an obvious misunderstanding.
Okay, shut up. Don't clarify, don't step into it and try to explain or clarify. If you're doing it out of irritation, passion, aggression, ignorance, that you're just irritated with the whole situation, not just you, but anybody, then it's going to be an elaboration, because the elaboration serves ego. Clarification doesn't necessarily serve ego, although it could, but there's going to be some kind of elaboration going on there that strengthens the positionality of me and how I see your confusion. You follow me a little bit? So when I say shut up, I'm just saying, don't talk. Sometimes if there's a lot of antagonism or aggression or finger pointing, or even the feeling that somebody's pointing a finger, but they're not doing it, there's just that feeling that they're discontent with you or unhappy with you, then drop your gaze. Not down like this, but drop your gaze slightly and listen. Or you could even say, I'm not following you. And then there might be a possibility, if they hear what you're saying, they might elaborate more, or they might clarify, giving them the opportunity to do that. It's less is better in most of those situations, especially in all of us here. You would not be here if you were clear about who you are. I'm not talking about somebody agrees with you. But if you were clear about who you are, you would not be here. You would not be in this particular situation. I'm not saying that you may not have a lot of clarity compared to the person right next to you. You might be very, very clear about your own neurosis, your own difficulty, your own ball of knots that are in the mind that you can't unravel. You sense are there, but you don't know what to do with them. And what this old man is saying, just look at them. You start to pull on those knots. The very nature of relative truth is it will suck you right into that ball of worms, and you'll be a participant in your own hanging or not tying, however you want to say it. But if you just look at it, consciousness that is not doing anything consciousness that is just receiving actually is the space in which the knots occur. So your identity is changed over from being the knot that's trying to fix itself, the ego that's in there trying to figure out how to stop suffocating itself. You actually are looking at it. It's so simple. If you have a thought arise in your mind and you do anything with that thought, you're right back to, you could go back to as far as the hell realm. You could be in hell. You could turn your mind into a demon when it was a Buddha 15 minutes ago. And suddenly you're a demon because you get swamped, you get magnetized out of hope and fear into thinking you can fix that. Maybe. The way it looks here, you don't have to fix anything. You just have to see what it is. Further questions?
How do we support others, our Sangha, friends and family by being direct and clear in our communication? How is that putting others before ourselves?
Well, there's lots of situations that could come up there that you might, or I might, or anybody might impute, well, I have to tell them, I have to be genuine, I have to be honest, I have to be direct. If you're lecturing yourself at all, it's the very nature of confusion is to step away from what needs to be, what you're relating to directly, to what you think about how to relate to it directly. So less is better. It's better to, from the point of view of that dynamic you're expressing there, is receive as much as you can. Lecture no one. Won't teach anybody anything. I said before, I'll say it again, don't teach unless you have to. If you're teaching out of your knowledge, you're just it's just more knots in space. It's not that the knowledge couldn't have a lot of accuracy to it, and you might be able to help somebody in some particular way. When I talk to any of the therapists, I always encourage them to continue to work with people as they show up. You can't. If a person wants to meditate, of course, you can teach them to meditate, but don't encourage meditation. Encourage people to, if they're coming to you, you probably already have a connection with them. Meet them where they're at. Meet them in the confusion and work with them in that confusion rather than try to get them out of it into a better state of mind. Not everyone is going to sit down and face a wall for years and years at a time, but all of you are. So here you are. Here I am. If you want this kind of help, I'm all about doing that, much as I can. Is there another question? Doesn't have to be.
Sure, bowing. If there's a misunderstanding in communication, is it mutual on both the person who's speaking and the person who's receiving?
I don't follow you. Is it mutual?
Yeah, or both people misunderstanding something?
Well, probably. What is it you want to know? Where does that come from? What do you want to know?
When we're in the middle of a misunderstanding, how do we clarify that?
So a generic response would be, it depends on the situation. There are some situations where you might have to chase the person down the street just because of the whole dynamic that's going on. Wait, I need to talk to you more about this. Don't leave yet. Maybe that. But the basic situation is less is better. Don't do anything. Continue to receive. As soon as you open your big yap, or I open my big yap, I stop receiving. We stop receiving. We're producing. You ask me a question, I receive as best I can what the question is, and often I have no idea what you've just said. From the point of view of, oh, well, let's see now, what would be the best response? or showed in this situation. I just don't function that way. I can't. I don't know how. I could even say I don't have the intelligence to do that. Lucky for you guys. So you may run after the person. You may run the other way. You say, no more, I've had enough of this. Got to go do something else. Talk to you, like catch up with you tomorrow. Could be, or it could be that you stand right there and receive. Tell me more. And even if they come up and say, what do you mean, tell me more? I've already told you everything. Why aren't you responding to me? You're acting like some kind of enlightened person or something. Like you know everything. Keep coming.
Does clarification mean that everyone will be on the same page?
No. No, the only clarification might be in your mind. You might be very clear about what's happening with, not only with yourself, but with another person you're in relationship to. Or the whole dynamic, you might be very clear about that, but you might not have someone that's ready to hear that. And so unless you have somebody that's asking you and wanting you to say something about it, asking you specific questions possibly, the general response is less is better. You're going to have really good communication dynamics with some people and not with others. You're probably going to have, if you have someone who's a teacher, in this case you do, you're probably going to have extremely good communication with that teacher, or you wouldn't be here. Mm-hmm.
Sure, Brian. What is it to appreciate those relationships that have disjointed or difficult communication?
What is it to appreciate that? Just that, you've said it. Just appreciate that. Appreciate doesn't mean to necessarily to assign value to something. It just means that because it might be something you're appreciating you don't even understand. This is when they talk about art appreciation. They don't mean that suddenly you get what Jackson Pollock was doing and why he slung paint all over his garage floor with sheets of masonite. Why would he do such a thing? Well, if you look at what he produced, but you'd have to look at it a lot. You couldn't look at it for 20 minutes when he spent his whole life, his very short life, to doing that. He's a powerful artist. And there's only a few people that really, when I say a few, I'm not saying there's more than thousands, but I mean, it's not really easy to appreciate that as to what it is, but you can appreciate what it is that shows up that you don't understand. It's very similar appreciation, not knowing what that is. Go ahead.
Sure, but how can we receive miscommunication without assigning that we're communicating incorrectly or that it's wrong?
Just see that you're doing that incorrectly or that it's wrong. As that shows up in your mind stream, just look at it. There's no double fixing. There's no double negative. The first negativity is bad enough. You think you're wrong. That's the first. Anything you do beyond that is further ignorance. You're thinking you're wrong might be a judgment about something coming out of passion and possibly some aggression. But if you do anything with that other than just receive it, then you're ignoring it, or you're shutting down. You have an opinion about that. That's ignorance. Passion, aggression, ignorance. Passion, aggression, ignorance. What do we do with? How do we relate with that? Be very, very clear about when that is coming and going, about how the passion grasps. Does other things too, but it basically is grasping. It also throws away blame, throws the blame, the feeling of guilt comes up and we throw it in the other direction, or we blame ourselves. Anything, we'll do anything but other than just look at it. Why? Because there's an ego that wants a position. There's an ego that wants to know right, wrong, correct. I am having all these emotions come up, which I think are mine. So therefore I need some attribution. If you have an emotion come up in your mind, can you just receive that and watch that come and go? Or do you need to find out who did it or what did it? How about it? Tell me.
Usually the latter.
Huh?
Usually the latter.
Which is what?
Finding the source.
Finding a source. That's awareness. You don't have to stop that either. But you may have an area where you notice that you don't have to actually fuel that response. it will feel difficult. You'll feel like you're failing. Ego does not want to feel like a failure. But on the spiritual path, that's where the failure needs to show up, the self-centeredness, the narcissism, the intense fixation on me and my stuff, my ideas, what I think, what I don't, especially with a brain like your brain. Not a compliment. But your thinking process is extremely powerful. There are several people in here. I'm not one of them. Several people are extremely good at negotiating any structure and consciousness with the thought process, with analysis and logic. You're very good at that. Lucky for you, I'm not. So therefore, you can't fool me. If I were really smart, then we'd probably cross swords. But since I'm not, you can't find me, can you? And that's a place in Africa. Okay, I think we've had enough of this. Sokuzan, did you have a question? Or are you just bowing out?
Bowing out. Thank you.
Well, you'll know, Sokuzan, that your little friend, or I should say your big friend, is still working on his grant material. Probably know that already.